All right. As we're dealing with quadratics, there's a lot of times that you're going to need to simplify radicals. Um, the reason that we simplify radicals instead of just spitting out a decimal, there's times where it's easier to deal with algebraically. It'll also help you get a more exact answer. There's some times where decimals work just fine, but being able to simplify radicals gives you kind of another tool in the toolbox. So we're just going to go over it real fast. So square root of 25, hopefully you know this is 5. But let's talk about why that is, because that's going to help us as we keep going here. So 25 is 5 times 5, or another way of saying this, it's 5 squared. Well, the square root of 5 squared, well, squaring and square rooting, they undo each other. That's their job. That's the square root's job, is to undo squaring. So if we've got something squared and then we square root it, well, we're just left with that original value. Okay, so the square root of 5 squared is 5. Okay, now here's one that's a little trickier. 18 is not a perfect square, so we're not just going to get an integer here. Okay, so we're going to break it down into its factors. Whenever I have a hard time factoring something else out, I start with 2. I divide by 2 and see what we get. So 2 and 9. And 9 is 3 and 3. So again, this is 3 squared. Well, what's the square root of 3 squared? Well, it's 3. It's not the square root of 3. We already square rooted it, so we don't need the square root anymore. What's the square root of 2? Well, it's just square root of 2. So anything that's squared, we can take the square root of, and it goes outside of the radical. Okay, anything that we don't have a perfect square, we have to leave it inside the radical because it's still being square rooted. Right. Square root of negative 9. Well, this is negative 1 times 9, 3 times 3. I cross these factors out as I break them down more. So again, we have 3 squared. Square root of 3 squared is 3. And the square root of negative 1 is I. Remember, that's by definition, okay? Square root of negative 1 equals I. And also, by definition, I squared is negative 1. Okay, that'll pop up occasionally, so it's good to keep that in mind. 180. Okay, I just wanted to show you one that was a little bigger. A lot of ways we could break this down. Again, a lot of times I like to start with 2 and 45, 3 and 5, and those are all prime. Okay, so 3 and 15. 3 and 5. Sorry about that. So, do we have anything that's being squared? Well, 2 times 2, that's 2 squared. 3 times 3, that's 3 squared. So we have a 2 that comes out, and a 3 that comes out, and a 5 that does not come out. Well, this is all multiplication here, so these are being multiplied. So we wind up with 6 square root of 5. Again, there's no addition going on here. It's all multiplication, which is why we knew to multiply those. Okay? Square root of x squared. That might make it look more difficult because it's variables, but it's the same concept. We have something that's being squared, and we're square rooting it. So it's just x. All right. 8x to the third. We can break this down. X to the third is just x times x times x. Okay, that's what that exponent means. 8, that's 2 and 4, or we can break it down to 2 and 2. Now we have to ask ourselves, is anything being squared? Well, the 2 is being squared, and the x is being squared. So we can do 2 times x, and then in the square root, in the radical, it's also 2 times x. Okay, so make sure you're putting your answers in simplified radical form unless I ask otherwise. Um, Good luck.